Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to the Ideal Lab Higher Education, the next big disruption. And before we get started, the whole idea of this lab is to listen to our moderators and come up with 5 big ideas around the topic of higher education. So before we get started, I see everyone's kind of scattered around the room, so maybe if we can get like 5 large tables and get everyone already grouped together, that will help for when we get to the end for the breakout sessions. So you'll already kind of be grouped up. So sorry, but if you don't mind, just kind of moving around just a little bit for us. Thank you all. Thank you all. I just wanted to kind of make it a little bit easier before we get started. So again, welcome to the Higher Education, the next big disruption, Ideal Lab. My name is Carmen Davis, and I am a volunteer from SunTrust Bank, who will be your facilitator for this session. And the whole idea of this session is for us to listen to the panel. If you have questions, they will be able to answer all of your questions. And then we'll do a breakout session after we've heard the panel discussion to kind of come up with our 5 big ideas, hopefully resolved around our tables that we are at. And then we will present those ideas at the end. Our moderator for this session is Peter Bluestone. Peter is a research associate with the Fiscal Research Center and Center for State and Local Finance. He is a Georgia State University Urban Fellows recipient, and he received his PhD in economics from Georgia State. So Peter, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. All right, we have a very distinguished panel here to help us work through some of these issues. And so let me introduce them real quick, and then I'll get into my short prepared remarks. We have Dr. Ronald Johnson, president of Clark Atlanta University. Sylvia Jones, Education Finances Services Director from Wells Fargo Bank. And Martha Dalton from WABE Education. She's the education reporter. All right, so I understand we're running a little behind, and of course, as an academic, I've got tons of slides with graphs and charts and all this stuff, so let's get right started. All right, so I'm going to stand up just a little bit. I kind of move around and talk with my hands some, so facilitate things. So higher education, the next big disruption. So what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about the changing landscape in higher education and how that affects these things. We'll look at enrollment, cost of education, funding, other things. I'm not going to touch much on technology in the classroom, in the workforce, but that has an effect. Global competition, a big effect, and we'll look a little bit at demographic shifts. So I'll do the easy work of telling you where we are. I'm going to use the National Center for Education Statistics. It's a great website for both higher education and K-12. And so I'm going to put up a bunch of charts and things from them, and I'm going to leave to you the heavy lifting of figuring out how we do all this stuff in the future. All right, here we go. So where are we now? There's over 4,700 higher education institutions in the United States. We'll look at the different enrollments of students. We'll look at race, gender, public versus private, distribution of degrees, look at distance learning, that's also online, right? And I want you to keep in mind some trends as we look at this data. The impact of the Great Recession, right? And market forces, right? Has higher education been responsive to changes in the market for education and occupations? All right, so here we have student enrollment. And this is, again, higher education. This is from the National Center for Education Statistics. going from 2000 to all the way they forecast out to 26. The last year of data that they have is 2015. And as you can see, female students, there's more female students in higher education than male students. And what happened right there, where's my laser pointer? There it is. Great Recession, right? We see this run up, right? No jobs, people go back to school, right? And then there's this fall off here. And then this nice straight line projection out. So if we're thinking that we're going to get a whole bunch more of people in higher education in the future, that's not what this shows, right? All right, enrollment by race. You can see, again, that college enrollment is predominantly white students. There's been a run up here again in the Great Recession. That was true for other students as well. And some of those groups have sort of maintained their gains over time. This was out to 2015. You can see for Hispanics, those gains have been maintained. For black students, that's been a little bit of a fall off. Also after the Great Recession, a fall off here in white students as well. Primarily, yes, but this is all undergraduate degree. So, and I'm going to show you a breakdown right here. It's the slide after this that has the difference between 4 and 2 years. So this looks at full-time versus part-time, and I was surprised I haven't seen these numbers in a little while, by the number of part-time students. That gap was pretty close early on in the period, 2000. It's grown. Full-time students have outpaced part-time students, but there are still a large number of part-time students. That's a potential well of folks working at Georgia State. We've done a lot to try to work with them and encourage graduation. Here is the 4 and 2 year enrollments. And again, early in the period, you can see the laser pointer. Oh my! Anyway, you can see that there was not much of a gap early on in 2000, but that gap's grown, and there's been a lot of talk over the years about using 2-year associate's degrees in 2-year institutions to try to bridge the gap in higher education. But currently, that gap in the number of students enrolled in 4-year versus 2 years is growing. It's projected to narrow some, but it's still projected to maintain out through 2026. So here's the number of associate's degrees and by the leading majors. And I was surprised to see this as well. You hear a lot of talk about too many liberal arts degrees. And I didn't think that was in the 2-year colleges, right? You think that there's more computer science information, some business things going on in 2 years, but the dominant degree here, again, is this liberal arts. You can see it ramps up considerably. The Great Recession keeps going. Response to market forces, you see health professions and related programs. That was the 3rd most popular degree early in 2000, but now it's 2nd, right, really ramped up. A little bit of a tail off after the Great Recession. A lot of business degrees, that's 3rd here. Computer science is here as well, and that's a credential or degree you hear a lot about. That's in the top 5 for associate's degrees. It is not in the top 5 when we think of bachelor's degrees. Again, a meme you hear often is that there are too many liberal arts, and you don't really see that here. You see social sciences and history. They are the 2nd most popular early on, but business dominates. Whoops, what did I do? I hit pause by mistake. I have fat thumbs. All right. Well, let me just chat a little from my notes, and you can visualize it. Creative visualization. All right. Here we go. Okay. Again, we're thinking about market forces and health and professional degrees, and those have really picked up in the latter period. They, again, are number 2. Let me this is a pretty straightforward slide, and hopefully we'll get to see it, but I will tell you about it. The difference between public colleges, private colleges, and private for-profit colleges. it's often, let me just tell you that public colleges dominate the enrollments. In 2000, there were roughly about 11 million students enrolled in public universities. There were roughly 2 million enrolled in private nonprofit, and roughly about between 500,000 and 700,000 in private for-profit in 2000. When we get out to 2015, those numbers have grown somewhat. There's roughly 12 million or so now in public, and that number shot up some around the great, are we back? All right, and we're back. There we are. It's just as I said, wasn't it? I wasn't kidding with you. Okay, I'm gonna use my thinner index finger. There it is. Okay, so you can see the run up here. Again, public colleges dominate. We've got this peak right here around 2010, a little bit of a drop off. Private nonprofit, those are your traditional private colleges, right? Harvard. That's been fairly consistent. There's been a little bit of growth, right, but not much. Where you see a pretty good run up here is private for-profit, right? Going through the Great Recession, you have this run up, and then you have this drop off again after the Great Recession. But in terms of a share of growth, these folks were second and close behind these folks. Okay, so keep that in mind when we look at distance education courses or online education. Now, what this shows is the share of students enrolled in that type of college and the share of students that enroll exclusively in an online program, right? Their degree program is only online. They don't show up anytime. They just take it online. So what this shows is private, for-profit, four-year institutions, 61% of their students are enrolled solely in distance learning, online education we think of it. The next largest, all of these are relatively small compared to that. Private nonprofit has 14%. The public four-year, 7%. This is a little surprising. You think a little bit more here, private for-profit two-year, but only 4% exclusively enrolled in online education. And this has a bunch of disclaimers about what that means, but essentially you can qualify for, yes?
So while we're on this topic, can you, I know Purdue recently bought a big online university, private university. I was wondering if you could, while we're talking about online education, talk about why an institution like Purdue would buy a private online university. I think it was, not Kaplan, maybe?
Can we do that? Can you hold that question till the end and let me just get through this? But that's a great question, and I'm sure our panel will have some interesting things to say about that as well. So let me just get through. Let me just give you a little bit of the boilerplate down here because it is an area of research that needs more fleshing out. You can qualify for an online education as long as you use some form of technology, the internet and whatever. But you can also and if you do that, you can send out DVDs. You can use streaming video and things like that. So there's some evidence that some of this online education isn't what we would think of as terribly high quality. And so that's an area of discussion I think that is worth getting into. Real quick, we'll look at the cost of higher education, how folks are doing, graduation rates and things like that. Here's a topic, again, I think that will be great for our panel. Changes in public sector funding and private sector pricing. This has an impact on what we're going to see as far as cost of higher education. So these are graduation rates by all types of students. These are four-year colleges, just the 4 years, and this is within 6 years. So this is the most generous amount of time that statistics are kept for these graduation rates. You can see that rates are fairly constant for certain schools, right? This is private, nonprofit. They've been graduating students at roughly 65%, starting with the 2000 cohort, ending with the 2009 cohort, right? The last year of data is 2015. So 6 years later, they graduate again roughly 65%. Public institutions have had a little bit more success over time, raising their graduation rates. They started out right about 55% and are getting close to 60. Again, Georgia State's made some news here. Bill Gates came and visited us and was very interested in some of the work that Georgia State's been doing using big data to target students and particularly interventions, both with tutoring and financial aid for students to get them to the finish line. What you see here is for-profit institutions. And again, those rates are pretty bad. That's 30%, that dips below, right? And that's about the highest, 30%. And so when you think back about who's doing a lot of current online education and you look at these graduation rates, this isn't an official study, but it does give one a little bit of pause about how effective that distance learning is at those places. This is graduation rates by race. Again, the same four-year colleges within 6 years. The highest rates are with Asian Pacific Islanders. Again, almost 70% by the end of the period. White students, again, slowly graduate, building from over 55 right to a little over 60. Hispanics have had some gains as well. And black students have been fairly constant, although right around 40%. So again, areas where Georgia State has helped some of these students, again, with that targeting students at risk to help them graduate. But data can play a big role here. Okay, here is what a lot of people hear a lot about, the costs of higher education, right? And as you'd imagine, it's gone nothing but up, right? Nothing but up. And as we'll see later when we look at people's incomes, most of our incomes have not kept pace. So this is all four-year institutions, and as we always think, you know, I'm an economist, so I know I think this way, I'm sure you do too, we all think in inflation-adjusted terms, right? These are constant dollars, right? So we can see that college education over roughly 30 years has essentially, you know, about doubled, a little bit more than doubled, right? But when we think about, you know, back to the good old days, back here in the 80s, some of you remember the 80s, right? And college was literally $3,000 a year, right? That's nominal, right? That's what folks will tell you. And so, and you can see that the difference is in the levels is primarily driven by the private and for-profit. Public institutions started out roughly $7,000. They're now at around $17,000. And this is, again, the whole shoot and match. It's tuition, fees, room and board. Private started out at $17,000 and now is roughly at $37,000, right? So there's been a big run up there. And again, I think it's an interesting topic for conversation about what the differences is in public versus private, about why that run up is and what students might actually pay. Finally, let's look a little bit quickly at some income distribution and then demographics. As some folks say, demographics is destiny. So we'll just look at that real quick. As I mentioned, right, incomes haven't kept up for most folks. This is going back to the 60s. This is the median income, right? It's just a little bit more all the way out in 2014. And again, this is in constant dollars than it was way back then. For a handful of folks, things have gotten much better, but again, for most folks, things have not. And that's what makes one of the reasons why that run up in college prices, or excuse me, college costs is so daunting for a lot of people. Finally, looking at demographics, right? And we go way out here to 2060. We see everybody's getting older, right? That's 65 and over. That's really going up. And the folks that might be in college, this is 18 to 24. As a share of the population, that's declining. So to the sense that any solutions in enrollment and getting more folks in college, the old corporate saying, we're going to have to do more with less. Everyone likes to hear that saying, don't they? All right. Some other things, real quick, impacts of the new economy on higher education. What will students need to be effective out there? Are skills going to differ dramatically from the skills that we currently teach, right? What's the effect of technology? You know, everyone hears a lot about AI, right? How does that play in? And when I mean AI, I mean specialized AI, like Google Translate. or things like that, not HAL from 2001, right? If that happens, all bets are off. I don't have any forecast for that. And how do we teach this? Is going to be very different from what we currently do in higher education, or is it going to look similar? How does use of technology adapt to fit the classroom? We have a lot of technology in classrooms. Is that going to change a lot? Again, and what's that going to look like? And I leave that all for you to discuss. So finally, turning to our panel, what changes do we see in the workforce, and what does that mean for higher education? Currently, right, we have slow growth in wages, seen from our income distribution. Also, disparate income distribution as well. That's a symptom of that. Lags in employment and the gig economy. And finally, what does higher education have to say, and how can higher education help with some of these issues? The other important piece is financing higher education, right? How expansive a system are we going to have, or would we like to have? What is the debt overhang? We hear a lot about student debt, right? That's the next big debt bubble. How big is that? And we have somebody here who can talk to that. What are the feds doing, right? We seem to be in a period, right, where that seems to be a bit of a redundant, or a question but things can change, right? And options for students. What are the options for students going forward? All right, with that, I'll turn it over to our panel, and maybe we can start with your question about why would Purdue, you go ahead and say it again.
Do I need to restate the question, or it was quite a while ago? Essentially, it was Purdue just bought Kaplan University. I think it was maybe a few weeks ago. They bought it for like $1, and I assume they just got their students and their technology. And there's something my table mate tells me is called Purdue Global University. So is this the start of a trend we're going to see where public universities are going to start adapting to try and stay more nimble and connect to that private audience or private student audience?
I can start a little bit. There is a trend in higher education towards consolidation. You see that in Georgia. There was a big Board of Regents push to consolidate certain colleges. It happened with Georgia State. Georgia State consolidated with Perimeter College. So there's economies of scale. One of the things that I didn't have this slide up there, that just showed exclusively students enrolled in distance learning, but distance learning is here, for part-time classes and as a complement to regular instruction. And so there's certainly economies of scale in distance learning, right? That's what makes the digital age what it is once you get that out, the marginal cost is almost zero, right? To roll it out to a bunch of students. So to the extent that Purdue could gain some advantages from the head start that this other online college had, and then roll that out to its students, you could see that there'd be synergies.
I would say that if we're talking about non-for-profit colleges, private schools, and public schools, their focus seems to be, to me, especially now, and this goes back to some of the work that Georgia State is doing, is how do we get kids to finish? That seems to be their focus. And I don't know that that's necessarily the focus of for-profit colleges, but that seems to be what is on the minds of a lot of administrators for public schools and for private schools, non-for-profit private schools. How do we get them to finish? And a lot of them, like Georgia State, are using predictive analytics interventions to help students. I think Clark Atlanta and Dr. Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong, has some tutoring programs and other options available for students who are first generation and that kind of thing. But that seems to be, for most schools that are not for profit, their big focus now. How do we get them through?
I would simply add that within the market for higher education, there are really 3 disruptions outside of the government. The government is a major disruption. And one of those disruptions is what are called MOOCs, massively open online courses. And the institutions that actually have, I'll call it a brand, can actually enter into the MOOC market and do well. There are schools that did not have a brand. Southern New Hampshire, for instance, they targeted a specific market, but they were early entry into the space, and as a result, Arizona State was able to do that. But the other schools that are entering into the MOOC space really already have a pretty wide-ranging, well-known brand. So Stanford and MIT and Harvard and the rest of them all going into the MOOCs. And what happens with those MOOCs is that they have thousands of people in a class, most of whom are taking a class for free. But if you want to get credit, then you pay. And so that's the structure. So now with Purdue buying Kaplan was already buying an audience of people who are already paying. And Purdue has a name, and so now, because they took the Kaplan name off and they put the Purdue name on, they bought the infrastructure, so they didn't have to create that. And essentially, it's just a variant of the disruption called a MOOC.
My name's Lillian Freeman, and I'm a resident here in Atlanta, a graduate of Spelman College. My mother retired from Clark Atlanta after 25 years, previously taught at Tennessee State. And I'm sort of excited and concerned about schools like Georgia State, for example, that are now doing what HBCUs have done for students of color as far as graduation rates and preparing them for the workforce. And the dilemma that HBCUs are now facing is, yes, we still do what we've always done, which is continue to put more black professionals into the field than ever. However, our costs are now out of control for most average African American and families of color. So how do historically black colleges address not only this slow pace of innovation, which we've never been known for, as well as the rising cost of education?
Well, there are multiple questions there. And I would begin by noting what Georgia State does. What Georgia State does is that they ask themselves the question, are we the challenge to the students? And so they begin by looking at just filling out the FAFSA form. Are we the challenge to the students? And then they came up with an answer, yes. And so they created a chat bot that is designed for the students to interact and ask questions without feeling, like they don't know what's going on, and to get their parents. And so and they began there, and then they moved on from the chat bot to ultimately looking at gateway courses to see if the gateway courses are a challenge. And now they're working on a pretty sophisticated model focused on financial literacy, but unlike the financial literacy models that are applied in most institutions, because any institution that has Title IV funding has to have some kind of financial literacy going on there, is that they are developing an algorithm to note the behavior of the student to determine whether that student's behavior is going to lead them into debt trouble. Okay, so that's essentially the model that they're using at Georgia State. It is, really state of the art. Now, the difference between Georgia State and, say, an HBCU, of course, now all HBCUs are not the same. So I could talk certainly about the difference between Georgia State and Clark Atlanta University, is that at Clark Atlanta University, we begin at a point that's different than their point. We begin with actually the student itself, the student themselves. So we're going to ask the same questions that Georgia State has asked. Are we the factor, okay? But the first thing is we've got to ask, are we actually doing the right things and finding the right students? Colleges are not designed for every person. Last year I gave a presentation in Rochester as part of the Mirror of Rochester's education event, and I ended by saying there was a person who could not see, could not speak, and could not hear. That person can learn, but I couldn't teach them. That's just not my experience. And of course I said that person's Helen Keller. Okay? She wound up being able to write books and give speeches and all the rest of that. But I don't have that capability. So we have to actually start out with who are we able to actually transform? And that's where we start. And so we start by looking for individuals who have what we call intellectual vitality. That's a passion for learning, curiosity for new knowledge, and grit. Now, we implemented that since I've been at Clark Atlanta University, and our student population, it was, prior to my arrival and implementing that strategy, 74% of our students were Pell eligible, which means that they basically can't pay. Only 59% of Georgia State's students are Pell eligible, so we're more like a state school than Georgia State. After we implemented our strategy, the Pell eligibility of our incoming students went to 72%. So we didn't drop down and get a whole bunch of prima donnas. And, but our entry SAT, average SAT composite went up by 100 points. The average student GPA went up by 30 points. Our retention rate, first one-year retention rate for the first group that we went through with this went from the 60s up to 70%. So we're starting out with the students, and it's basically a simple model. And when I lived in Houston, I used to be on the board of the Houston Ballet, and the male ballet dancer, when he catches the ballerina, if she goes limp, unless he's Hercules, he's going down. So we begin by saying, wait, the students have got to use their soft tissue muscle to be able to hold themselves against gravity, so when they drop, it's not dead weight. And then from there, we can then ask the question, what are we doing to present? So there are differences. And so, as I said, your questions are really good. And we can actually spend all afternoon answering all of the aspects, but I think the most important ones I may have addressed.
We have
Just to add something to what you indicated earlier, I do want to say that one of the things we all need to know is to reach out to the younger ones in high school. All parents need to think about college credits while in high school. Now, there are some schools in DeKalb County, like DeKalb Early College, where kids from 11th grade can begin to take college credits before they get out of high school. By the time they graduate, they have associate degree and a high school. That helps to cost costs. Atlanta Public School System, I think recently enacted the same program. So it is very important that we, especially we minorities, let's look into that and see how our children can actually, go through that process and save cost. Okay. Also, exploit the technical colleges. There are the technical colleges, some of them are free. There are some credits you can get through technical college that can transfer you into bachelor's degree, full school, and you don't have to pay them when when you transfer to those schools. So these are areas to deeply exploit. My question is, what strategies do you guys think is available for any institution to utilize on increasing graduation rates?
Well, I think part of it, again, is it sort of goes back, not to keep, and I'm not saying this just because Peter's here, but it goes back to sort of what Georgia State is doing, the intervention methods that they're using. They're focused on counseling, on catching kids, as soon as they don't get a really good grade in a class, they don't wait until they're already into their major before they step in or say, what's going on here? So part of it is being able to intervene early. Another part of it, I think, is finances. Georgia State has also done this, but so have other colleges in Georgia, and I'm sure all over. They have offered micro grants for students who are short just like a couple $100 toward tuition, and they don't have to pay. Obviously, it's a grant; they don't pay it back. Georgia Tech does that too. The University of Georgia is doing it. So schools are starting to kind of realize the importance of getting kids through, I think, and they're also realizing that in order to have a really strong workforce, they have to recruit a diverse student body, meaning they need to start looking at first-generation college students. And if you're going to try to recruit first-generation college students, you need to have support systems in place. So I think that's where a lot of schools are sort of heading now. They're realizing the importance of that. They're putting interventions in place, some faster than others. But there are systems out there, support systems and data systems that schools are employing to kind of do that, to help, you know, kids get through, because that is a focus and they realize it's a problem, a lot of them.
So I'll come from a little different perspective. Prior to starting with Wells Fargo, working with their education financial services side, and I try to educate parents and I work with colleges and universities, but I will say that, you know, in our population now, first-generation students, really they're about 50% of students now are first-generation students. And with that, I not only think that, you know, college and universities, they have things in place, some of them do, to help first-generation students. However, being a former financial aid director, I will say that the decision as to where you're going to go to school, what your major is going to be based on the type of debt that you get into, that has to come first. Because once you make that decision and you're there, and you have to take out so much debt and you don't even realize that before you even get on campus. And statistics show that three out of 4 families do not even have a solid plan on how they're gonna pay for college. So it's all about education for me, and it's all about education prior to stepping on that campus, prior to signing any type of loan papers. Students graduate with and unfortunately some students aren't graduating, and that's the main problem, with debt and couldn't even tell you how much they have or who they borrowed from. And so I think education is key. It's gotta happen. It has to happen more. And you know, there's so much information available online. You can learn, but you have to know the right question to ask, right? And so while we have all this information available, we have to educate our students, our kids, to know the right questions to ask. And not even the students, the parents, their first generation, okay? They need to have a good understanding of what's going on. And like I said, I just see this, it's just constant. And once they get on campus, they're really kind of lost. And so that's why they're not completing, they're not graduating, and then they return, and then what? And so for me, I just think it's one of those things where we really have to continue the education prior to them stepping on college campuses. There needs to be a lot more education before these students sign up for these classes, take out any type of loan debt. There's something called loan entrance counseling, but it really isn't enough. Obviously, it is not being very impactful for these students. And so I just think the question has to be, what do we need to do as a community, as a country, to really try to fix this? And I hope we have 5 great answers by the end of this session today. But I just think it really is around education, and we need to do a lot more.
Well, I would add, but before I add, I just want to mention that early college is a good way to reduce the debt. However, in the upcoming budget for Georgia, if you go and you look in that early college budget, there's more money spent on early college in the next budget, and the rate at which it's going up is astounding, than if you take the Hope and Zell scholarships and put them together, more money in early college. So it's guaranteed that the next legislative session is going to do something about early college, because it's getting to be really expensive. So so it actually helps reduce your costs, but the thing is, it's getting to be really expensive, and my expectation is that it's going to get cut. Why? Because the Hope and Zell scholarships are really designed for wealthy individuals, okay? And early college is designed for people who don't have any money. So you just figure that one out. But anyway, in order to keep people in school, there are a host of factors that affect the students' ability to finish. And one, as I said, if they don't really have the vitality, they're not going to finish. In the United States, from the 4th grade on, the intrinsic motivation for learning drops. So someone could show up on the first day of class and have what it takes to finish, and the next day, because they're on the decline, they can't finish. So there's a whole bunch of factors that are involved there, including these factors that you don't know what your major is going to be, and that's one of the things that Georgia State has figured out. That you don't know what your major is going to be, so you take courses over here, and you take courses over there, and then wind up running out of time. And then dropping out. So there are a lot of factors that are there. But if you really want to start out on the right footing, one of the better indicators of success in college is what did the person do in algebra. It's really interesting because in algebra, algebra captures a lot. It is, of course, math, but it's not just quantitative. It requires comprehension, okay? And so if people take algebra and they don't make it or they don't do very, very well, then when they get to college, they're not likely to do well. One of the things that Georgia State has done is that they have the Summer Success Program. And in the Summer Success Program, they've taken advantage of a loophole in the Pell Grant where you can take up to get paid for 7 credits through the previous year's Pell. So you're not drawing on your first year's Pell. And so they have the students who are in that risk category come in and they can then take some of the quantitative courses, especially those courses of college algebra, so that then they increase the probability that they're going to get through the programming. And so there are a number of things that can be done. And certainly, as I said, one of the things that Georgia State has done is the Summer Success Program, recognizing that quantitative measure is an important measure, or not just a quantitative, but algebra is an important measure for how successful a person is going to be in terms of getting out of school, college.
Let me add one more thing. Colleges need to be able to also innovate, and some of the things that might improve graduation, we don't yet know. For instance, as we see more and more first-generation students, one of the programs Georgia State started was using student tutors to help kids from first generations. And what Georgia State found was that students from first-generation families were less likely to approach professors and faculty for help, but they were much more receptive from their peers for help. And Georgia State found that out through A/B testing, right? Pilot programs, looking at what worked, and looking at the data to see how they could innovate with something that wasn't, readily apparent, right off the bat. So again, colleges need to be able to be nimble and use the data and innovate.
Hello, Clarissa Myers-Harris, President Johnson. Good to see you again. I have been in higher ed for almost 30 years, working at both predominantly white institutions, PWIs, and HBCUs. And in terms of this context, this point in time of disruption, it seems based on what each of you has said, actually we're not talking about actually reinventing the wheel or even brain surgery or really totally out the box. We're talking about really going back to some tried and true methods of education and things that HBCUs really have done since their inception in terms of high level of student engagement, starting before they enter the door of the college or the university. So yes, going to the high school dual enrollment programs for sure, early college for sure, but even before that, starting in elementary school, as President Johnson said, 4th grade, you're losing students already because the educational system is really not addressing the needs of students. That's why coming in, so many students, white as well as blacks, need remediation or need developmental education just to get them onto the level needed to be able to do well in those first general education courses. So we really need to create a more intentional pipeline and connection between elementary, going back to elementary school, but really, quite frankly, we need to go back to the preschool. You know, we need to revive those concepts that Head Start was started on, to that early preparation. And so you need to have this seamless pipeline, this pathway, so that more students can be ready to go into college or to do something else, whatever they choose, but to have options, not based on the level of education that they receive before coming in, or the level of comprehension or success, but they need to have options that are based on the fact that they have been adequately prepared in this pipeline through this pathway, so they come in ready. Also, we need to reach out to the workforce. Now, surely we have these relationships through internship programs, but I think there are a number of industries that need to be brought in more, and they need to contribute more, so that the cost of education can be shouldered not only by the students, but by those industries, organizations that actually will employ some of these students. And there are all kinds of ways that that relationship can be nurtured. And when you have that kind of collaborative relationship, a lot of those industries will buy into it, because if they're not educated in the colleges and are not educated in a way that they need, then they're going to have to re-educate them once they get in their doors. So a lot of opportunities, but we do need to reclaim and we go back to those methods that we've used successfully in the past and reinvigorate them, expand them, and enhance them in order to have the level of success that we need.
Well, I would like to just quickly respond. There are two things that you said that I'd like to respond to. First, there is a need to have an inverse pipeline from the universities. At CAU, we actually have one. We work with an organization called Horizons, and they have 8 sites in Atlanta. We're the only HBCU that has it. And Horizons takes rising first graders all the way through rising 8th graders, and they come in during the summer so that they maintain and actually accelerate their academic development. And so we run that program. We also have another program called a Meal Maker program that's funded by Verizon as opposed to Horizon. And that's focused on middle school students. And then we have high school programs. And these are all in the summer. And then, so this year we have, I guess they're now rising 6th graders. So those rising first graders that started out, they're now in a cohort and are rising 6th graders, and each year we've added additional classes. And it's project-based learning. They start out with doing Legos, for instance, in terms of technology, but by the time they get to the 3rd grade, they're actually making robots. And so we are actually doing that as a university, because that's very, very important. You're absolutely right. I mentioned earlier that there are 3 disruptions that take place in higher education that come from higher education and not government. And I talked about the MOOCs. There are 2 others. One is called boot camp, and then the other one is called badges. To be quite honest, I don't care what university you have that you know of. If they're going to be around 20 years from now, they're going to have to either be involved in MOOCs, badges, or boot camps, because that's just the way it goes. And for us, we have looked at badges. Badges are also known as stackable credentials. In terms of the question of the lack of innovation in higher education, what we're doing at Clark Atlanta University, and we're not the only place, but what we're doing is we're unbundling the educational package. If you think back in the 20th century, you went to buy a car, and then you wanted to get an upgrade on the radio in a car back in the 20th century, you would then have to buy the Chrome package. That's what they tell you. I guarantee you, anybody who was around buying a car back then know that you want to buy the upgrade radio, unless you went to some bootleg place to put it in, they would then you have to buy the Chrome package and all that extra stuff. In the 21st century, when you go and you want to have the upgrade radio, you just tell them that's what you want in the car. And they put that in there. Now, they have packages as well, which actually makes it cheaper if you at the radio and all that other stuff, but you don't have to get the package anymore. You get what you want in the 21st century. And higher education really is moving in that direction. The fastest growing population of students going to 2-year schools are students with 4-year degrees who are going back to actually get what they needed that they didn't get in that package, that bundle they were given when they were in the school. And so what we're doing is we have our faculty have really been excellent. That they looked at our liberal arts core and they reduced it from as much as 57 hours down to as low as 32 hours, depending on the major. 32 to 36 is the maximum number of liberal arts, and they tied them to attributes or capabilities that you need in the marketplace, regardless of what your field is. Those freed up hours then have been now released, not added to the major, but released so that the students can expand their bandwidth. So I'll give you a very, very simple example of how that works, and then I'll stop. If I want to go into psychology, when I come to psychology, I'm not knocking psychology, I'm just saying if I came to psychology, then if that's my field, I'm making a commitment to 8 to 10 years of education. 8 to 10 years of not getting paid, okay? 8 to 10 years of paying tuition fees and all the rest of that stuff. But if I'm really interested in psychology and I come to a place where you have a stackable credential in cybersecurity, and they take cybersecurity as a stackable credential and put it with psychology, people come out of school with $90,000 pay after 4 years. You know, my wife has a cousin who, well, the daughter of a cousin, who went to University of Maryland and did Japanese history and Japanese. I still, you know, she was in love with anime, and I guess she couldn't draw, so that's what she wanted with those things. And so when she came out, she got her degree and no job. And then what my wife's cousin told the child, you got to go back to school and get another credential. So she went to a 2-year school, got a credential in cybersecurity, and she now works for the U.S. Embassy in Japan. Okay, and so once you start to look at this, then you start to see, you know, that there's got to be some intentionality about this. The other thing about this, the last point on all of this, is that Georgetown did a study on where black folks go and concentrate with bachelor's degrees. And in that study, they found that the highest salary for places where black folks go with bachelor's degrees was $63,000 at the midpoint for people aged 26 to 59, $63,000, and that's computer information systems. Now, the thing is that I'm not saying that there's psychologies in there and all the rest of it, but if you take the stackable credential, you're not going to get paid the psychology salary, you're going to get paid much more. So that's one of the things that you do. The other is that you then say, well, should I go into this area or should I actually step up in terms of the value added? So computer information systems is the highest paying, $63,000. But if that person took a bit more math and more computer science and took a computer science degree, they're graduating out of 95% right now of our students who are graduating out of computer science are leaving Clark Atlanta University this spring with a salary of $85,000. So guess what? Next fall, computer information systems, which is one of our programs, is gone. Cybersecurity is going to replace it. People coming out in cybersecurity in this town walk out of the door with an undergraduate degree at $90,000 to $110,000. It's got to be intentional, and that's one of the things that we're doing. And that, of course, is keeping with HBCUs, but that doesn't mean that HBCUs are doing that. Okay, it's I've deconstructed HBCUs and said that we need to unbundle, and we need to be really intentional about what it is we're trying to do.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I want to be intentional, and I know we have a lot of questions in the room. However, we are short on time and do need to get to our table discussion so that we can have our 5 big ideas before we end. So at this point, I must say, can you work with your groups in your questions, and then hopefully at the time we present our idea labs, our 5 big ideas, you can incorporate some of your questions from your groups within that question session. Is that okay with everyone? Because we're really running short on time, so I do apologize if I didn't get a chance to get to you. So she wants to put something on the table for everyone to think of, and she's going to make it real brief.
First of all, my name is Deborah Neely, and I work with a group of people who have an initiative, and we work at different schools. But what we do is transition education, educational access information. So what we're doing is what the gentleman over there, and I didn't see who he was talking about, is educating people whether early college is the right option. What is the right option? Is it the right option to be a psychology major? A lot of times students don't know what to expect. And it is transitional education that makes a difference. And it's not just for the students. We work with the students and their families. Most students don't realize that they don't graduate in 6 years. Most students don't realize that if they can't do well on the SAT test, that they can go to test optional schools. So there's a lot of information that we don't know in our communities and our schools don't know. So what I would like to put on the table is a way for higher education's institutions, Georgia State, Clark, Atlanta, to be able to interact with the high schools. I know we have College Advising Corps that's in Georgia State, but they're primarily in APS. But there are students in DeKalb and Clayton County that need the same thing. So I want to talk about how we can have transitions, because there's 450 students to each individual high school counselor, and those high school counselors are not even trained in college transition. So they know a lot of things, but they have a lot of things on their path. So I just want us to think about that at all the tables. Thank you.
Thank you all. Again, I hope everyone's had a very engaging table discussion. How we're going to proceed, we're going to allow, hopefully everyone has at least a speaker or someone at the table that will be able to present your idea. I'm gonna call on table by table. If there's a table that's ready and wants to present their idea, please raise your hand and let me know. Otherwise, I'm just gonna pick tables at random, so I hope you're ready. You're one person that is going to present your idea. I will ask, once you present your idea, if you will come write it up on the board. I understand we may get more than 5 ideas, and that's perfectly okay because we have more than 5 groups, so we're okay with that. So we'll take the table in the back. And I'm gonna bring you. You wanna come up? Can everybody hear me?
Check.
All right, so my name is Rayanne Alves, and I have a nonprofit that focuses on helping parents prepare and help their children reach their full potential. So with that backdrop, I had the pleasure of helping facilitate this team, and they had several ideas that we really had to try to find a way to encompass all of them. So this was our attempt. Our question is, how do we prepare children for the transition to college, as well as provide them various options, such as whether they do vocation or whether they go to traditional college?
Okay, can you put your idea? Thank you.
So I'm Maureen Sweatman for this group here. I'm a career coach and have worked in higher education for over 15 years. And we had a lot of ideas as well, but one that I thought that we should put forth that's really doable is, while we do this forum every year, have a simultaneous kids forum where we're doing a lot of this work, including maybe teaching them algebra, right? Teaching them how to network, teaching about career pathways, FICO scores, all the kind of things we've talked about, but the babies aren't in the room, and the sooner we get to them, the better. Right? So that was our idea.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Housey, student loan expert, LLC, and my nonprofit is the Financial Literacy Institute Incorporation. So we came up with the 3 Ps, and it is called the Parent Partner Program. And the Parent Partner Program deals with the curriculum of teaching financial literacy from the 2nd grade to the 12th grade. But we also called it the Parent Partner Program because we want to make sure that the teachers are involved, the school counselors are involved, as well as the parents. But we want to make certain that all of our legislators understand that all of our children learn in a different format. Some are audio, some are visual, some are hands-on. In doing so, they will understand if they need to go straight to workforce, or do they need to go to college? Because everybody may not be college ready or college accessible to go. So if we do this information beforehand, then we don't have to worry about this $1.48 trillion in student loan debt, and that way we can all have that life of financial well-being.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ian Cohen. I'm speaking on behalf of Candace, Irene, Calvin, and Carmen. I myself used to be a high school teacher, then co-founded and led an education nonprofit. I've worked at state and district policy levels, and now I'm in entrepreneurship. We talked about, when talking about the challenges, we really focused on two things. The one was alignment, on how it's right now, as a teacher, you tend to think of how do we align the objectives at the end of what we're trying to get to with the lessons we do every day. And in the current education system, the alignment between K-12 and higher education and our workforce is really out of whack. All the incentives are messed up, and the skills are obviously not meeting the needs. And then the other sort of more philosophical question we discussed was, ultimately, what is the purpose of higher education? And the higher education institutions we're referring to and the panel discussed were never really founded with the purpose of what we're trying to make them used for today. And they've had to morph over time, and each of them is different. Each of them has a different vision and a mission. And so we tried to think of some ideas to help bring these things together. So we came away with three pretty straightforward ones. The first was, if we all agree that we want a workforce for tomorrow, sort of a general term, then trying to explicitly define what that means at a skills level, at a mindsets level, and at a knowledge level. And I think anybody who's worked in education knows that you can go to district, school to school, state to state, you'll find different answers to that question. So I think from a national conversation, aligning on those would be one good step. Second, that we kind of threw in there was corporate involvement. I mean, the business community and honestly the professional working world has a direct stake in the success of education. So getting them to actually put some skin in the game in addition to just waiting and hoping the taxpayers pay for everything and it works out for them. And they are taxpayers, so they should be invested in that anyways. And then lastly, this is sort of a very different idea, but we love the stackable credentials approach that was discussed. And one thing we threw out as sort of a more crazy kind of left field, it's not crazy, I'm morphing your ideas, so I didn't mean to call you crazy, was what if every higher institution had to define sort of a technical or a professional niche credential that they could offer in addition to their current course offerings as sort of a way that maybe we hear from technologists and other future employers directly about here are the industries we need, and then every school that is maybe publicly funded or something like that has to create a stackable credential in that space to kind of take this trend and universalize it as opposed to waiting for every institution and every school to make changes. So those were our three ideas. Apologies for the long-windedness.
I guess it's live. We had two broad ideas, and this is pretty loud, isn't it? So two broad ideas. One is, both of these are around really developing more aligned, coherent systems at the community level. And one broad idea is around influencing CRA policy to encourage CRA credit to be awarded for efforts to design at the community level more coherent systems from pre-K-12 all the way through post-secondary and adult education around making sure that there is more accurate information for low-income students and their families, so that, for example, and I'm a recovering dean, so which was a really good characterization to this. I'm no longer a dean, so I'm unfettered, so I can say the following thing: when we advise your son or daughter, yes, they can go into elementary education and get a wonderful credential, we should also be required to tell them, and they will not find a job unless they also have special ed certification. Okay, so part of what we need to be doing is part of the system has to be giving honest, accurate data about okay, so one piece of policy is around CRA, which is to say let's give CRA credit to invest in bringing together the stakeholders in a community that span from workforce development to parental education, to financial aid, to financial literacy, all the pieces that have to come together to dramatically improve the odds that a low-income student is going to succeed and come out with something that's really going to be useful for them and get them a pathway into a living wage career and a life with dignity. The second area of policy, very quickly, is around accreditation for post-secondary institutions. And as many of us have personally experienced who aren't recovered and are still in the field, post-secondary ed, they know that regional accreditation associations have already been for some time moving in the direction of data-driven decision-making systems. Where these institutions have lagged, though, is in delivering on making this information accessible to prospective students and families. So they should be learning about what is the attrition rate. Right? They should be knowing what percentage of your alums are actually getting jobs remotely related to the field. And this is not to diss liberal arts, but families that have high stakes, that they need to get into living wage careers, they need a lot better data, and they need to be empowered to know that they have a right to demand that information. Is that okay?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sheena Robinson, and I am with Financial Parent Academy. Our organization is a 501c3 nonprofit that teaches parents how to teach their children financial education at home. And sitting here at the table, a lot of the ideas that we have, they were great ideas, but some of the things that I haven't heard yet, one of the things I really want to stress is the system of how we do reporting grades. And when teachers report grades, I think we failed a lot because a lot of times they knock students' confidence. And I think that is really the starting point to a lot of things to find out, especially what do I like to do, what are my gifts and what are my talents. And instead of teachers telling you just, what you need to improve on, there needs to be a resource sheet as well as if your student is doing good in English, if they're doing good in arts. These are the type of careers you might want to start looking at with your children so you can start helping them develop that skill and cultivate that skill right now. Instead of just saying, oh, they made an A and you're giving money, let's cultivate that skill because that's obviously something that they're good in. And then second, when we talk about being on a college campus, young people mentoring and showing the path, there should be a senior mentoring a freshman their whole first year. I remember when I was going to college, it don't have to be just the first year, but to have a mentor that is also a student. A lot of times it's good to get an adult, but the age that we're living in, it's more relatable when you might be a couple years older than me, but it seems more attainable when you're talking to me, you're doing it, so I can do it too. And then there should be a college performance test before they enter so that they understand cost of the field that they're going in, the affordability, profitability. So kind of like, a test score of how they're gonna do in college with the information that they're given. So one of my great colleagues over here, he came over with that and said they need like a FICO score. So they'll be set up for success and they'll know ahead of time what the predictability is when they're coming out of college. So that's what we had at our table.
Hi there. We had a great discussion here at our table, and some of the ideas that we had are really incorporated in some of the others. And so I'll focus on two that I think have not been discussed yet. One is a juvenile justice system pipeline, very intentional, very systematic, that would prepare our young people who are caught up in the juvenile justice system, educate them. And of course, we have programs where individuals in the justice system, in the criminal justice system, can get GEDs, but we need to go beyond that so that you have young people, middle school age kids in the juvenile justice system, and high schoolers and older people taking MOOCs, and we have relationships from that system and community colleges, four-year colleges, universities, so that the idea is really training them, preparing them, educating them so that they can go out and become productive citizens with careers as opposed to being underdeveloped and ending up caught up in the criminal justice system forever. Ultimately, it'll save a lot of money. Ultimately, it will help the economy and society in general to have that kind of system, but it will take a lot of work to develop something that works, but I think we can do it. Second, and again, we had a long list, but I'll skip to that, go back to that collaboration between higher ed institutions and the corporate world and industries, so that it becomes much more intentional, and industries, corporations are investing dollars in these in initiatives and partnerships with institutions, and a part of that investment would be in helping to make sure that faculty in the classroom are up to date, know the latest developments, know what the corporations, the industries are asking for, and the only way you can do that is by training the faculty and having the faculty go on internships in addition to the students. And also and I just have to give kudos to our black male 5th grade teacher at our table, Dr. Little. Would you take a bow? And that touches on another need, more folk who look like the students in the classrooms, beginning in the early grades. And so the idea of Dr. Little, just better teacher education. And again, you have to bring in those veteran teachers who were excellent teachers in the classroom. Don't discard them. Bring them back to educate the educators.
Thank you.
I'm David Brewer, retired United States Navy after almost 36 years, and former superintendent of schools for Los Angeles Unified School District. Not to basically belabor some of the other things, we have 3 military people at this table, and so one of the things we learned very, very quickly is that you don't reinvent the wheel, you basically go after what is working and what is successful. And the success model that has been running for 25 years in the United States of America is a program called the Tangelo Park Program in Orlando, Florida, which is my hometown. It is a pre-K, starting at 2 years old, 50 weeks, full day. It has a neighborhood center for families. It's a whole family approach. And so what's the airline analogy? When you lose oxygen, who do you put the mask on first? Yourself. You empower yourself, empower your child. So this particular program has basically done that. And it takes it all the way through. The number one reason why poor black kids don't finish college is what? Money. So you put money on the back end in terms of college scholarships, et cetera, and funded through public-private ventures. This program has produced the following results. 42% of African Americans finish college after 6 years, 48, 49 Hispanics, 60% whites, 69% Asian Americans. Tangelo Park children are finishing at 77%. Now, embedded in that is a counselor to student ratio. It is a crime, I can tell you as a superintendent, it is a crime to have a 1 to 400 to 500 counselor to student ratio. That is a crime, especially in a Title I school. So what Tangelo Park did, not only is that ratio reduced, that college counselor, for those in education who know what I'm getting ready to say, they loop with that student from 9th grade all the way through to college graduation. So they own that kid all the way through. That also entails career counseling, et cetera, et cetera. So the final 2 pieces, and I'm going to turn my microphone over to Patrick Phillips here in a minute. The other piece is something called the Triple Crown program. You talked about going back into community colleges to get credentials, et cetera. In LA, we front-loaded that. Career tech license or certification. And we brought the community colleges in to the schools. So we said you would graduate with a career tech license or certification, an associate's degree, and a high school diploma. So now you got all the technical, you got all the educational piece, so you can either go straight to work as an expert with an associate's degree, or you can go to college as a freshman in junior status. You finish in 2 years and you're out the door. Now I'm gonna turn it over to Patrick to talk about something called intentional student.
I'll try to be quick. Great job. This whole conversation makes me think of a quote by Frederick Douglass. He said, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And what he spoke about was that approach from the meso, macro, and micro level. What I'm going to talk about is the intentional student. I actually wrote a book called The Intentional Student, 17 Strategies to Survive and Thrive in College from Day One. I'm a college instructor. I'm a first-generation college student. And everything in the book and this whole principle is that what we've been discussing is just being intentional, from knowing what majors are, that pay the money, what majors will be around, the type of debt that you're looking at, building community on and off campus, internships, so that when you leave, you actually have those skill sets and you have those different things. So being intentional as well. And that also includes, incorporating the parents in that decision-making process and also educating the parents. First-generation college students don't have parents who went to school, so they don't know so many different things. So you go to school, trying to do your best, but you don't have that role model, you don't have that support. The other thing that was important, and I know that was a factor for me as well, was I was afraid to take on the more challenging majors because I went to poorer schools. And I always thought about that I wouldn't be successful. So I think exposure opportunities, and that goes back to the whole village mentality from the macro, the meso, and the macro perspectives of working with those kids from an early age through exposure, through mentoring, so that when they get to colleges and places where they're ready, we're not doing a whole bunch of remedial stuff, but they were coming ready to begin with in the first place. But that's got to be a whole mindset shift because that's not where we are. We don't really live in a preventative society. We live in a very reactionary society, and that's a problem. So that's it.
All right, thank you. We have our last table, which is up front. We will let them present their idea, and then if at the end, if you feel like there's an idea that did not get presented, you can, or one of your ideas, you can also just go up and add it to our Ideal Lab easels up front. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Rhea Kim. I'm the founder of Millennials Chamber of Commerce. These are the 3 ideas that we came up with. One is begin with the end in mind and design intentional and relevant curriculum. So while there are mandatory courses that you have to graduate college, frankly, many of them are not relevant in a real life situation. With all due respect, I did not need algebra to make sure that I went to law school and then, became a self-sustaining society person. And that's what we really want. We want each student to graduate and be self-sustaining and make sure that they are able to financially support themselves and add value to the society. So why not design intentional, relevant courses that will serve them exactly that? Second one is bringing outside resources that will strengthen their strength already. So instead of just kind of focusing on things that they really need help with, which is also great, but people, when they're doing something that they really love, they're just naturally going to become better at it. So bring experts and outside resources, maybe have some funding towards that. The last thing is building a network of support. While we have a lot of the Greek culture and some of the internships, career centers, and things of that sort coming up, many of us are first generation, or what I am is a 1.5 generation students, so we don't always come from having parents that have the time or the resources to be able to support us financially, emotionally, and spiritually, and we really do need that to be able to succeed. So if the colleges can put in extra effort in that initiative and just kind of create more programs that will, bring encouraging, empowering atmosphere, that'll be very great.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for their participation in this Ideal Lab. I want to thank our illustrious panel here, and I want to allow everyone to provide any parting words as we close out this session. So we'll start with the moderator and then work our way to the end.
We're up. Am I on? Thank you all, and those were all very interesting ideas, and I did get the sense that what we talked about was higher education, but the real focus on starting really young. There is a good bit of research out there, James Heckman, that looked at the returns to early education, and the returns to education, early education, are much larger. Just as this gentleman said, it's much easier to empower a child early on than it is to try to fix something much later.
Well, I can appreciate the range of ideas. I think they're all very, very useful. And in fact, hopefully we will get a copy of them because I like to think about them in the context of what we do at Clark Atlanta University. And of course, we're also a UNCF school. And I think that this type of forum is important because we don't have, no one has the answer. But collectively, as we discuss, we can actually find ways to build the bridges and the roads that allow us to be successful.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of the ideas. I thought, wow, what are we going to accomplish in 15 minutes? But I think we got a lot on this board here, so excited about that. But a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Someone talked about, the corporations. One of the things, because I'm all about the finances, is that companies now are, when they're hiring our students, one of the things that they're doing is they're actually offering as part of their hiring package, paying off part of their student loan debt. So that's a big thing now, and within the next 5 years, you'll see a lot more of that. So that's one positive thing. And also, to give a plug, at Wells Fargo, we have something called First Generation that we try to do within the communities. And for those of you that have nonprofits, we send a lot of free information to you to disperse to your communities. And the site is called, let me get it here, so gocollegenow.org. And if you go to that site, you are able to order lots of materials that you need to help prepare these kids for college. So gocollegenow.org. Thank you.
I'm so impressed by all the innovative ideas you guys had. And I heard a lot of people mention that they're connected with nonprofits that work in the communities, whether they're here, wherever you live. I would just urge you to go to those nonprofits, to go to the communities and share your ideas with them, because that's how change happens. So thank you.
All right, I want to thank everyone for participating. I was just informed that all of the Ideal Lab ideas from all of the sessions will be emailed to all of the participants after the conference is over. Thank you all for joining.